All right. We are ready to be started, I guess. Welcome to the PROCON, Process Consolidation Working Group, or I don't know if you're all process enthusiasts, or yeah, but I don't know. I think we maybe are more keen on doing some house cleaning work. Occasionally, you have to do that. So that's at least my motivation for being here. Anyway, so I think this group probably is quite aware of the IETF note well and procedures. Take note if you're not. In particular, be aware of the need to have professional collaboration and be nice to each other when you discuss. And if you haven't signed on to the Meet Echo yet, then please do, so that we know who was in the room. And if you want to speak on the mic, then please use Meet Echo to enter the queue. So what are we talking about? We are talking about the working group that's going to update the base process RFCs at the IETF, and we've been doing some updates over the years. There's over 20 RFCs updating the 2026 and 2418. And it's a little bit difficult, even for us who are super experts on IETF process, to understand what is that set and where were the updates and so on. So it's taken quite a lot of work for Rich, for instance, to compile the set of changes that there is for these documents. So our goal is kind of, first of all, editorial, that we will specify a BIS document of these both RFCs that will merge all the documents and verified errata that update the RFCs. So that's task number one. Task number two is not so editorial, but it's constrained in terms of what we can do. We will specify BCP to allow the IETF chair to delegate in some cases, if he or she so wants to do, some responsibilities that he or she has. And the working group may also revise procedures with regards to milestones and working group adoption of drafts. But this is not a working group for, free for all process innovation or rewriting of various kinds of things that somebody doesn't like. So that, I think, is my understanding of the situation, at least. Roman, do you agree or disagree?
So let me make a couple comments. So first, everyone, welcome for our kickoff of this new working group. I appreciate everyone's input and feedback that got us through the charting process. And I also wanted to acknowledge Jari. Thank you for your willingness to serve as the working group chair. To officially kind of announce, I am here sitting up front, not as a working group chair, but just as an extra set of hands to help Jari facilitate. I expect that we'll be able to make another chair appointment very, very soon. So please stand by on that. You asked a very specific question. Yes, you have accurately summarized how the charter is currently laid out. I recognize also that there's been different enthusiasm for wanting to open up the different processes in 2026 and 2418 for, I think you put it very eloquently, for further innovation. And I am certainly welcome. I certainly welcome a little bit of that conversation, but I would very much like us to finish the consolidation first. I believe that this will be the basis, having all of those RFCs peppered over well over a decade into a single document that then we can review holistically as the basis for a future conversation about how we can do that process innovation is the best approach for us. So I would just remind the working group, let's work on that consolidation in 2026 and 2014. And then as that comes to a close, then we can begin the working group conversation. Is there more work to do? Thank you.
Can I ask a quick clarification question?
It is not on. No.
Can you hear me? No.
Oh,
yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Quick clarification question, if I may. Apparently, I didn't read the charter carefully enough in the first place. Talking about delegation, the second point here, I think we also talked about what happens if the IETF chair just disappears and then having kind of a fallback mechanism so that the IETF keeps running. Is that in scope or not?
Well, let me answer first, and maybe Roman will add to that. That's what the current document, for instance, we have a proposal for this. It talks about the sort of emergency replacements and then sort of more voluntary delegation. And the properties are slightly different, and who you delegate to is also different. And I personally would like to see that within scope. I don't remember the exact wording right now. I hope that's in scope.
So
The reason why I'm asking, because it's only saying voluntary here.
yes, so I think that is an incomplete cut and paste from the charter. The charter, for everyone's kind of benefit, is that the working group will specify a BCP to provide the IETF chair latitude to voluntarily delegate select responsibilities to other serving ADs, period. This BCP will also define a temporary succession plan prior to the NOMCOM being able to fill midterm vacancies in case the IETF chair is unable to serve for any reasons. So this is just a snip of the first sentence. The second sentence, of course, is still scoping the work.
Yeah, moving on. So agenda for today, we are, actually, we should probably have a note taker. I forgot to do that. So anybody willing to take notes? Don't see hands going up. Somebody, please.
Karen.
Thank you.
The notes already have a skeleton agenda with the pointers at all the documents.
And so the rest of the agenda is about the actual proposed work or documents that fit the bill for this working group's charter. So 2026, 2418 updates, Rich, and then milestones, David, and then chair delegation. Unfortunately, Lars Eggert is not here, who has a draft on this chair delegation, but we had discussion with him, and I have one slider. We can talk through that topic as well. So any comments on the agenda, additions, or things to take away, or shall we proceed with Rich? Yeah, let's proceed.
Okay, so I assume most people were here. Most people were in the dispatch in Ireland, but I'm going to repeat some of that to give some background. This was work that Scott. Well, I think it says on the next page. Yeah. Okay, so this is work that I did with Scott Bradner. John Clenson also added a sanity check and did reviews of all the content changes we made. Why do we do this? I'll skip that first bullet. I wanted a single source of truth document. I got tired of having to scan through and follow all the links on rfceditor.org. I'm probably also a OCD, like we all are. But in particular, if we're going to change things, it's much better to have a clean document to start working with. What I did, or what we did, is all the non-editorial changes that are in this document were things that had gone through the IETF consensus. So some of the, for example, some of the errata were like, this sentence doesn't make sense or something. That was, we incorporated that. But if there were things that were semantically meaningful and were actually changed the meaning, that's still an open errata. We think 2026 is pretty close to being done. Yari's email says kind of the same thing. Of course, that's barring any changes that the working group wants to make in the limited scope that the working group has available. I'll point out that I'm a neutral observer in this. I've got no dog in this fight, as the phrase sometimes goes. I don't really care whatever changes the working group wants to make. If it's consensus, it's fine with me. Some acknowledgements. It started when Robert Wilton said, hey, it'd be nice if somebody merged everything. Sandy Ganoza emailed me the NROF sources. I will say in converting it to Markdown, NROF is so much easier than XML RFC to convert to Markdown. Mark Nottingham had the brilliant observation, do each draft, do one update per draft, do one RFC per draft. So that was really great. John Clinton said, speak to Scott. Scott is retired and is building a replica of the USS Constitution. Seriously. And talks about like molding to get the cannons right. But he was also very helpful and did a lot of work other than the basic text editing. And John was very helpful in kibitzing Roman for getting the PROCON thing up and running really quickly. Okay, so here's what we did. Converted to Markdown, posted draft. Then looked at the RFCs, and that was not an obvious thing to do because it would say sometimes, and I'm making up the numbers here, 2026 is updated by 3521, and then you look at 3521 and it says was obsoleted by 5677. So all of that prose and text history is incorporated in the introduction, but you can see it's made explicit what we incorporated and what we didn't. So applied those changes, double check to make sure they're all right, post a new draft. I think we were up to what, 10 drafts, 12? But at any rate, we did that repeatedly. The last change we made is pulled out the IPR, intellectual property rights section. It just points to subsequent RFCs instead. Talking with Glenn, there's the Intellectual Property Management Corporation. Got the name right. Trust is so much easier to say. IPMC is planning on, documenting other policies and procedures, and so we don't want to start out being obsolete in 6 months. So we just point to those existing documents. There's no need to copy them. That was arguably a change, in content, but we think that it implicitly had the consensus because we published 5378 and 8179. That was we published a draft. I reviewed all of the errata and anything that was an editorial change and was still relevant because a lot of them became irrelevant when they were because of other updates, published a new draft. So that's the process by which this was all done. There are some known open items. Most of these come from Yari, or many of them come from Yari. There are two other RFCs that are impacted but not mentioned. 5657 is about interop and implementation reports being necessary for a standards track to be accepted on the standards track. We have to figure out what, if anything, to do with that. Right now, the text says it may be useful to do, and then points to 5657. 3669 is about working group IPR requirements. We'll have to figure out what to do about that too. Tim McSweeney opened up an issue early on, focused on terminology. I don't understand it, what he was asking. I can guess what some of his motivations were, but I don't understand it. Michael Richardson posted some feedback to the PROCON mailing list. There's a pointer, and these are GitHub issue numbers. Section 622 predates the formal strict enforcement of the IPMC, and it allows the RFC editor, also outdated, to publish documents even if the proper rights are not granted. So I think we need to strike that, but that's it. Two errata. One was you need rough consensus for publishing a document and probably need rough consensus for reclassifying if we move it from BC informational to standards track. That should probably be added. And the other errata is about 5657. So that's 5657 and the last bullet definitely need to be addressed. There are some unknown open items. Is there a policy issue about RFC content versus other? I don't know, whatever the working group decides. We need people to do a big overall read, particularly those with IETF experience, to find other sections that are outdated or wrong. I think we got most of them, but that are listed on the previous page, not sure. Are there other changes in other RFCs or errata that we've missed? Are there other major issues within the scope of PROCON? If not, then maybe we just say that they're, we call it out as an issue for future post-chartering work. We need more people with OCD to read it with a fine-tooth comb to find nits that are outdated or wrong. And that's, I think, the last one, except the obvious next step. Robert.
Robert Sparks. A little bit perhaps unusual use of a review team, but it would seem that we could leverage GenArt for this fine-tooth combing. So
Great.
request early reviews and formally, get an actual track and volunteers.
Yeah. Thanks. Good suggestion. Just start speaking. I'm not going to call names. Go.
Glenn Dean, Comcast, NBC Universal. So so that it's captured in the notes from this group. Let me give you where we are with 5378. So 5378 has a update that's posted. If you go look at draft Bradner intellectual property management rights considerations, that's there. It's largely 5378 with a sections renaming to acknowledge the IETF IPMC as a replacement for the IETF trust. It's good. We're waiting on our esteemed area director here to let us know how he wants to conduct the review for that. But when that gets done, you'll have an update there. Overall, this work, let me just make the general comment. I would love to see this done for the documents related to the trust and the IPR. And the trust doesn't take care of that because the IETF owns all of its documents for the IPR rules. The stuff you've encountered here with these sets of rules, all these issues, exists there as well. There's a lot of these, this refers to that, which refers to that, which refers to that, because there's a lot of history there. So when this work gets done, it'd be really awesome to see somebody named Rich take on the champion to go through and do the same thing for those documents, because I think it would really help things. So I'm very supportive of this. If you need any help on the IPR stuff, just reach out. I'm happy to help and to clarify things.
Thanks. And you write your request on the back of a 20, as they would say in Car Talk.
Oh yeah, Jonathan Lennox. I mean, this is probably answer is yes. I just wanted to make sure. You said, were there errata on the documents that you merged into 2026, and did you take those?
Yes. So when I incorporated the document, so in my personal GitHub repo, which presumably will transfer to the working group, there's another file that says errata and lists all of the RFCs that updated and what errata they have. So I did the transitive closure.
Cool. Thank you.
And these were the two I mentioned were the only two left, basically.
Hey, it's Pete. So I ran 2026 for the first time this week. You saw my comments on 2418 on the list. I had questions before I start writing up stuff, and we haven't even gotten to fine-tooth comb level yet. The first is on the definitions section, which seems pulled straight from BCP 79, because it includes all the patent definitions, some of which aren't used at all in 2026. Was there a purpose in bringing all of those in, or that was just an easy copy and paste and we'll clean it up later?
They were in the original RFCs, so they moved forward. Yes, so those things should probably be taken out.
Right.
But we didn't have, there's no consensus document that does that, so they're there now.
No. Those definitions are in a consensus document. They're copied now into 2026 BIS. They were not in there before. They were not in the old 2026.
No, but they were in one of the RFCs that updated.
Okay, got it. So you just moved, and then we're gonna have to clean up and figure out what.
That's the kind of cleanup that we should probably do.
Easy enough, and I can help with that.
Awesome.
The other two, when you did the move of stuff from the status level reduction, right?
Mhm.
From you don't mention draft at all in the new document. And there are still documents out there which live in that draft state. Do we want to leave that out completely, or do we want to at least mention there is this legacy status out there? And I'm not sure what's best, but I'm glad to make a suggestion and then let it be pounded on the list. But was there a conscious effort there, or that was just let's bring in what we can?
It was the latter. All we brought in was consensus text, and nobody ever wrote a document that said things that were draft status should now have that status removed. If we want to mark it as historic, whatever, I don't care.
And that explains the answer to my third question. So perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just going to jump in with AD override. I mean, Rich is trying to thread a very careful needle. This is, if I suspect down the road we are going to find things that are incorrect, but we do not have updates from community consensus documents. We are not chartered to fix some of that brokenness, and that may be some of the future conversation that we need to have. The first step is, I think, to surface this and identify that, and let's get some reviews. But I think for the answers in many of these questions, Rich, is you have moved things over because the chartered scope is an editorial merge, and if you didn't have anything to editorially merge through the updates kind of tags, it is not there.
Correct.
And that reminds me, I forgot one thing. Yari, if you could put a link to the GitHub on the working group page, that would be helpful.
Yes, will be done.
When it's created.
It's Murray. Two things. Can you just say more about that first bullet? Like, what are you thinking about when you say other?
So it's more applicable to 2418, where we might want to say, oh, working groups have milestones, and then on the working group chairs page, it describes kinds of milestones you might want to have. So again, this is probably more related to what would be a follow-on document, where we say, this stuff shouldn't be here, it should be somewhere else, like the IPR stuff is elsewhere. So maybe there's other things.
Okay. The other question was, how do you guys want to handle, as we're going through these and reviewing these things? Like, suppose I want to look at the appeals section of 2026 BIS and say, that doesn't work anymore. We want to do some other things. Do you want to start collecting a bunch of issues for later rechartering? Do you want to pick them off one at a time? How do you want to organize that?
I think it's useful as we do this work to have a list of other things that we noted during the process, and exactly how we manage that, we'll have to see. A list of GitHub issues is a reasonable way, but let's not throw those observations out.
Right.
But also they are not topic of this particular update.
So do you want to collect them in any particular? I guess what I'm getting at is, how do you want to organize that? Do you want to collect them
I
somewhere?
would like to see like a separate bucket for that collection.
Okay.
Yeah, we can make a BIS repo that has issues in it.
Issues. That's kind of there's a good answer to my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I would do it as a GitHub issue. If it's not written down, I forget.
Jean Mahoney, RFC Production Center. I am an RFC editor. I don't know who the RFC editor is in 2026 anymore. So, and that's outside of the scope of these edits, but just calling that out.
Yeah. We are all Spartacus.
David Skenazy, process enthusiast, here to talk about process. Sorry to get meta on us for a second. It might be a comment for your next slide about next steps, so let me know if you want to push that there. But first, to the previous points, I think let's just have them all filed as GitHub issues on the same repository. GitHub labels work amazingly for that. We can have an argument as working whether this is in scope or out of scope for a charter, and then you put the for next revision label on it. And then when you review as a working group, you exclude that label so they don't even show up. We've done that very successfully in HTTP and in other working groups. It's a good tool for this job. But what I actually came up here to say is, as one of the people with OCD who's going to be reviewing this, it's going to be tricky. And I really, really do appreciate that you've been kind of cutting a new draft pretty often to help the diff. What I want to figure out is, how do we interact that with adoption? Do we, and I'm not saying this is a good idea, but like, do we adopt a draft that's exactly equivalent to the old RFC and then have like a call on the list for every commit? I'm not saying we do that, that's way too hard, but it would be great to have a way to split things up so that people only have to review one diff at a time as opposed to the whole document. Because I've read the whole thing, I'll read all of this, and I can guarantee you that I'm incapable of diffing them in my mind.
Right. My intent is to just migrate the repo over, so all of the other drafts, they're also tagged, and so you can see what changed when we incorporated a particular, what changes were made when I incorporated a particular RFC. But I don't want to start from -00 of the individual draft.
Absolutely. The only concern and again, I'm not suggesting we do more work. I'm a big fan of doing less work. But the one concern I have is, let's say, I think Pete's comment about draft RFCs is a good one. 2026 says there's a thing as draft RFCs. We have a future RFC that says we don't do those anymore. When we incorporate that diff, do we just delete it, or do we say there used to be a thing that was that doesn't exist anymore? That's in the realm of the editorial changes that we can make here, as far as I can tell. And if those were made before adoption, I still want to have that conversation so we can, for that diff, decide what that diff should look like. What?
Can we
That's
Microphone.
my exact point, that it's removed, but to me, I think removing was maybe not the right call. It was removing, but replacing it by an editorial sentence like Pete suggested.
In other words, Pete was suggesting that instead of just removing any mention of draft standard, we say there used to be a draft standard and those documents should now be considered proposed standard. Or
Yeah. So I'm just hoping, and we don't need to figure out today at the mic line, but when we do adoption, that we kind of take a look at those things to make sure we get the right one and have us focus on one at a time, because otherwise we'll go insane.
Yeah, I would suggest a better way to do that would be to look at the document, the modifying document, rather than the draft text, to make sure the intent is carried forward.
Yeah, Kulvin, on this point, I actually disagree. I think you did a really great job doing one draft per change, so you can actually follow this nicely. And now all the changes are applied, so this is absolutely the right moment to adopt this. And if you think we need to mention something about the past in the draft, I think you should just open an issue and we can discuss about it. So I think we are, yeah, I think we are in a really good shape, and we should adopt the draft right away as you have it there. But that wasn't the reason why I came here. I do have another process question, because my understanding right now is that we want to apply the existing consensus document to this document. But if it leads to a state where something in the document is still wrong because this is not the process we are currently applying, and then we are sending this, or we publishing this as a new RFC, that's really, really confusing. So there is something about changing the process we have right now, but there is also something about the process actually changed and the document doesn't catch up with reality anymore, which would be a bad outcome, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, again, I'm going to be annoying, whatever the working group decides is fine with me, but we could publish the BIS document with a whole bunch of errata that say this is no longer valid, this is no longer valid, this is no longer. It's amusing. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good point, though. Marking that things are planned to be removed in the future, maybe that's an editorial thing, but I understand the consideration.
Yeah, I think it would be, my only point is I think it would be a bad outcome to publish something which still doesn't catch up with reality. Yeah, okay. So I don't know how we handle that. And then a very last point about the RFC editor. I think the RFC editor model version 3 doesn't update this document, but it does change the language, and it has consensus, right? So maybe you should just apply it in line with the new model.
Yeah, that's what whatever it is. Yeah, are there agreed changes that we missed? And so this would be one of those, exactly. I would think.
Yeah, on this question of publishing something that is, not matching reality, I think maybe that discussion is difficult to do in the abstract. So let's just, observe the things that might fit into that category and then decide exactly what we want to do. We have some non-editorial changes already agreed in the charter. If we identify additional things, then we'll need to have a discussion whether we make an observation in the document that, yeah, this is not matching current reality, or we make an actual change and agree with our AD that we can do that, and so on.
Do you think, as I totally agree, we need to talk on this case-by-case basis because we really need to understand what's happening there. But I guess the easy way out is like taking stuff out of the document. Do you think that is in the charter, or that's also just a change? Maybe, yeah, maybe we discuss it later when we have the problem.
Let's do it case by case. I at least I personally am not ready to say that, yeah, taking out is totally fine in all cases.
Yeah, this is Pete Resnick. I think we want to discuss this at length and sort of case by case, but come up with a principle, because I can already think of, there was a point at which Rich and I discussed in another context, For instance, in 2418, there's this concept of, now I've forgotten the title, that the chair can assign someone to run the discussion, which, as far as either of us could find, hasn't been used at least in 30 years. Removing that, though, would be a bummer, because it's a process we haven't used, but it's not like we're now doing something that negates it. We just haven't used it. That's the kind of thing I would leave in. Whereas something that we do that is the opposite of what is in the documentation, that we should fix. So I think you're right. Weigh it on a case-by-case basis, but maybe the principle is unused stuff that is maybe useless fluff nowadays, but might be used in the future, leave it alone. Stuff that is actually wrong, that is actually the opposite of what we're doing, we should probably at least talk about fixing.
I think that makes sense. I just want to make sort of a practical point also, that the set of things that we could be changing if we sort of open things up is infinite or very large. So if we actually want to complete this exercise, then we need to be pretty strict about what we actually are changing. And so, the bar is pretty high for, having that discussion that what should we change, and maybe that, actual wrongness versus, not very useful or not used today. So that could be a good distinction there.
I think it was working group facilitator.
Leslie Daigle, I think that there are at least 3 distinct phases, or we should maintain sanity by pursuing them in distinct phases. Phase 0, where we are now, is just doing the editorial. And while I think, yes, it's right to take each of these cases on a case-by-case basis, we should do it after we have at least an internet draft that represents an editorial update of combining all of the documents. And then go through and take on a case by, because if we start saying halfway through that, here's what it says here, but it was updated by that, or it's a missing piece, example, the RFC editor nomenclature, I think we will make a big mess. So step 0, editorial, then case by case of what's actually not current practice, figure out what that looks like. Maybe the working group stops there before rechartering, maybe not. And then the follow on is, what is accurate description of what we're doing now, but we'd really like to fix it.
I just want to slightly disagree with Pete, because I think having all these extra stuff in there that we don't use, and then people from the outside look at it and say like, what's that? That creates a lot of confusion. It makes our pros look more complex. So I think it's actually harmful. And those ones might be the easy ones, right? So where we like never used them, we all probably immediately agree that we can just remove them and we're done. So I think we should keep those in mind.
Yeah, I had a comment on this, your policy issue, Rich, and I think for this document, this is mostly about the RFC. I don't recall any example here that where we could consider moving stuff in some other place, except of course if there's a whole thing that's defined in another RFC, and now we point to that's totally fine. But that's not the case necessarily with the other work that this group has. So I don't know, milestones, for instance, could be, or draft adoption. One could even think about like wikis and such instead of RFCs.
Yeah, no, it's more important on 2040-18, but since we knew the IPR was elsewhere, I just wanted to record that the issue was maybe there's other things.
Yeah, Jonathan Lennox. I feel like there's, to expand a little bit on what I said before, I think there's actually 4 categories of things. One is the one we're doing now, which is things that formally updated the drafts we're editing. The second is things that had IETF consensus but didn't formally update it, which I think is was kind of an editorial decision on the part of those documents and should also fall into that category. Third is things that have de facto changed without a formal consensus document, which includes things that are just abandoned, but also if something was just changed otherwise, well, that's maybe another issue of how to do that. And then fourth is things that are actually changes, which I think should definitely not be in scope. So I think the question is, I think 2 should count. Well, the thing I counted as 2 should count sort of anything that has IETF consensus, even if it didn't formally update these documents, I think should be incorporated.
Yeah, I think your 4 categories nicely split into bullets 1, 2, and then splitting that last one into 2 pieces. Credit where it's due. That's from Yari.
Well, Pete's next in the queue.
Pete, are you still in the queue or?
Okay, sorry, didn't want to queue jump because we are about process and that would be violating process. I realized when I made comments about the updated 5378 for the IPMC, I was looking at it from the perspective of the IPMC. Let me ask you a different question. Even though you've pulled the IPR pieces out, do you expect or think there might be IPR changes that come about from the IETF side that the IETF IPMC needs to take into account when it's doing its licensing and all that kind of stuff? Because we take the cue from the IETF.
Me personally, I don't have any, I see no reason to change things. I know other people have asked for changes, like Martin had a document in dispatch that said allow derivative works and stuff, but I don't have any changes. I don't know if the group does.
Okay, so okay, but if there are, let me know. So it's sort of out, but it could still be in-ish. Not in the text, but there may be outcomes.
If something comes up that we change the document and it affects IPR, I will make sure to shoot you a note.
Perfect, thank you.
John?
Yeah, I sort of said this in the chat, but I think we should seriously consider some working group. Partly responding to Mary's comments, I think we should consider as a working group the possibility of actually inserting this needs future work, this is going to be a change, this might be obsolete, comments into the text, not to make the decisions, but to point to future work and provide a warning that the consolidated document may not be the final word on the subject, and we may not be doing things that way. It will require some slightly fancy work and some careful editorial work, but I think it might provide a middle ground between the notion of keeping it strictly a consolidation and reflecting reality. Just a thought. Thanks.
Thank you, John. That makes a lot of sense.
Queue being empty, obviously next steps call for adoption.
Yeah. Any feedback on this? I heard Miria say that this would be ready. I personally read it and felt that it was quite far. Obviously, there's some things that were not perfect and some more that we discussed here today. And maybe there's more of this, mapping of the document and what might not be matching reality and making some additional decisions. But I think this is a really good editorial result. So any feedback on this question? Do people have opinions?
David Skenazy, I think I am supportive of, or very supportive of adoption, depending on what you mean by adoption. I think Rich has done some great work here. I think this is a great starting point. And so by what we generally mean by adoption, absolutely. But I want to make sure that adopting it at its current state means that we can still make changes to it, obviously, but in particular means that, like, after adoption, what I think I would do is go through the 75 commits on the GitHub one by one and go, yep, that makes sense. Yep, oh, for some reason, this I think we should talk about. And would like to have the ability to, in some cases, discuss those, like, the one Pete mentioned earlier. Is that okay? How do you feel about that? I just want to make sure we're on the same page for what the life after adoption will look like.
So the process is pretty clear. So we adopt it, then it's in the hands of the working group, like whatever the working group consensus is. And the kinds of things that you were talking about is, I think, exactly in scope. And maybe there's different methods of going through. I went through a diff between the RFC and this, and felt it was pretty clear as well from that perspective. Of course, I had to match like this is because of that RFC and so on. But and then there's probably exercises to read through the whole document and understand if there's something wrong. It's probably useful to go through like different sources of information. As an example, I think Rich used the data tracker or the relationship between documents as a starting point, like what actually updates. I used a different method, so I arrived at a different set of things because apparently what's in the data tracker or the updates relationships and so on don't exactly match if you do a grep on the RFC directories. So more of that kind of stuff may be needed.
Mary asked if there are RFC updates missing.
There's one, I think 3669 is mentioned as updating 2026, but then 2026 does not say updated by on the webpage.
I look forward to this working group sending around Git commit IDs as easily as we say things like 2026 and 2418.
Hold my beer. PR numbers might work better, but so that sounds good. One of the risks I see is I want to avoid second system syndrome, or I guess fourth system syndrome, because this is the RFC process version 4 now. We're going to want a ratcheting mechanism, by which I mean, let's say we integrate one RFC, we declare consensus of how that was integrated, and then we declare that kind of tabled and move on. If we do what you're proposing of just it's kind of open season, I do it through the commit, someone else does it with the diff, I think that can work too, but we might reach a point where, hey, come on, we discussed this back in 2025, can this be closed? So just maybe we might use a slightly different process because of how unique this exercise is compared to a usual draft. But either way, I'm supportive of it. I'm just planting some ideas in your head. I'll your job to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, but something being in the hands of the working group doesn't mean that it's sort of a free for all season on reopening stuff. I mean, of course, we will have, higher bar for reopening things than finding new issues and so on. So I think we'll find a way to do this in a way that satisfies you.
Great. I absolutely think we can. So then I fully support adoption. Thank you.
Pete Resnick, shortest answer, adopt it. It's ready. Slightly longer answer, I'm one who thinks that it's perfectly okay to adopt an ID that has the boilerplate and a line that says, we're going to do the stuff that's in the charter. I think that's a fine place to adopt. So this more than satisfies. I like the structure of this, of taking the original text so you can see what changed, plunking in the new stuff. I think that's exactly the right way to approach it. I'm not even close to as even mildly concerned as David is about the method to get all this stuff done. So good, go forward, do it.
Yeah, my feeling was that when this was ready to leave the working group, it would still be version 3 of the standards process.
Just thinking about this, I support adoption. Related question though, do we want to provide any guidance about, I did a consolidation like this for the nomcom stuff. It became 8737 or something like that.
8179.
Oh, you're awesome. You're quoting these like you're quoting GitHub numbers. Do we want to come up with any guidance for when there are this many updates to a document, you should do one of these PROCON things in the future? This is a way bigger effort than what I did with the nomcom stuff. But like, at what point should we start providing guidance? Like, you might want to think about crushing this down again.
Sooner than now.
Well, when I did that, it was like 6 documents. You're bringing what, 40, 50 together or something like that? So like the sweet spot is somewhere between those two, I'm figuring.
IPv6 was mentioned has 300, I think.
Say that again.
Somebody in one of the earlier workshops mentioned that IPv6. Oh yeah, they fed all the IPv6 documents into an LLM, and there were 300. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, let's not go to tons of other topics actually now. So I've heard support for adoption, and Suresh, you wanna speak first?
Yeah, like for the adoption, I'm for adoption, but there's like something I wanted to say that's nagging me a little bit about this document. I don't know if you thought about this already, but there's like quite a bit of outdated stuff in there. So Miri and I have been doing this like spring cleaning kind of thing for some of the older documents, right? Like taking out stuff. There's like stuff like applicability statements and ASS and TS stuff that's in here. How relevant is it for today? Is that something you kind of want to clean up at some point, or are we going to keep the?
So I think we had a discussion, and my summary of it is that we're going to keep the stuff that we know is wrong or outdated, make sure we record it as GitHub issues or errata or something, and then after we get the unified documents out, then we can consider rechartering to update them to reflect reality.
Okay, sounds good.
And maybe we'll put a note in it, this is likely to be removed in a future edition or something.
Sounds good. And similar stuff, right? Like, I think Gene spoke before, but like there's like RFC style guide stuff in there. Like, there's like a bunch of things probably that we don't want to put in some document that's going to live for like 20, 30 years, right? Like, and that was my kind of niggling feeling, but otherwise I'm totally good with this. Thank you.
And that's probably more relevant to 2418.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so my thought is that okay, Jay.
This is slightly different, so if you want to go back to that.
So if it's on 2026 or adoption, then go ahead. Otherwise,
no, it's not.
I want to emphasize again what people already said, that we have like 4 different things here. Step 1 is merging in what we have already, which is mostly done, maybe 1 RFC missing or whatever. Step 4 is really changing the process, which is out of scope. But then we have these 2 things in the middle, which are like small editorial changes or something that we know we need to have consensus on, and the other things that are somehow wrong and we need to discuss. So keeping those things separate, putting a GitHub tag on it and discussing the first part first and the second part later, that would be really appreciated, I think.
Absolutely. So my read of the discussion is that the support for adopting this document will, of course, take that to the mailing list. I have not heard arguments against, and it's also very clear that there's process remaining. We're not done, but we're adopting a good starting point. So that's where we are. And so now we can move to the next document, Rich.
Did you want to say something, Jay? About?
I'm sorry, it took me a little while to think this through. Going back to something that was said earlier about this, given that this is such a substantial change, there is the potential here to consider some additional form of tagging or something within an RFC that makes it clearer that this is a process documents that we're working on. So potentially another sub-series or something else, so that when people externally read and understand that, so that when people read and understand these documents, it's clearer that these are IETF process documents. This is a very good starting point if we were to introduce something like that, because it is such a big thing and because it is so core to the internal working of the IETF.
Yeah. I hate for someone interested in HTTP3 to stumble into 2026 and think they had to do it. No, but I'm just, yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to put myself on the queue. I wanted to ask Jay a clarifying question. So the intent you are proposing is that in the RFC series, we bifurcate. Some things are the technical work and something is the process work. Can you say more? Because I don't understand the intent, because the process stuff, of course, applies to everyone. And I know we were joking around, someone from the HEB working group, but yes, in fact, it does apply to the HEB working group as it applies to every other working group.
No,
So
it's
can you
not
say
to,
more?
It's not to bifurcate, it's to add an additional layer of information onto it that is clearer to people outside of the IETF, that this is the way the IETF defines its internal processes. So we have a difference between RFCs that external people might implement and RFCs that we internally implement. And it's that differentiation that is useful for people to understand externally.
So like a boilerplate sentence that said, this documents IETF processes, for example, would that meet the need?
I don't know. That a boilerplate statement doesn't necessarily support searching, filtering, and those kind of things. But
Yeah. So that's an interesting discussion. Maybe not core to what we are actually doing here or are chartered to do the edits. I would also make the observation that there's multiple ways of adding this additional information. It could be part of websites, having a nice list of process RFCs and so on. Not everybody has hard disk full of RFC text files that they have to look only at that and then figure out if this is a process document or not. John, go ahead.
Yeah, with the understanding that this is clearly out of scope and the chair should say so. I think Jay's comments are correct, but open an entire can of worms about how our processes for handling procedural stuff versus our processes for handling technical documents need to be separated, and the lack of separation is symptomatic of brokenness in all sorts of ways. I can remember discussions of that topic back when I was heading PROCON, which is one of the POI successor groups, and it's clearly something which we should be talking about at some stage. But let's not open that door and put our feet in it as part of this first stage agenda. Thanks.
Thanks, John.
Mike Bishop, similar comment. I think that might actually be useful to do, to have like a sub-series of BCPs, that this is not a best practice about protocol deployment. This is how the IETF operates. However, I think that's a decision for RSWG to make. If we passed the suggestion to them and they decided to create such a sub-series, then sure, we can slot into it. But pass it to them, let's work on our document, and if that's happened by the time we're ready to ship, great.
Thanks, Russ.
Russ Housley, I want to agree with the last two. Let's not do this now. Remember the RFI subseries, remember ions, remember every other attempt we have tried to pull this out. Let's not slow this work further.
Okay, Rich, take it away.
Thank you. All right, in the spirit, we'll skip the title. You need to give me control, or I can say next, whichever.
Yep, just a second. You have control.
Okay, why do this? Same sort of thing. I'll just only talk about the last bullet. 2040-18 is more outdated. That's all. 2026, we haven't changed the process, but the working group changes have evolved. Some examples, the RSWG discussions, the TAO of the IETF document, and its retirement. Thank you. So, same motivations. Acknowledgements, same as on the previous section. Tim Wyszynski actually read this early on and filed a whole bunch of issues about things that are would fall into the last category, about things that are just wrong are now wrong in the document. So I acknowledge Tim. One of these days, I'm going to explain DNS to him. Okay, 2040-18 did the same thing. Convert to Markdown, submit the draft. For every RFC that updated it, that wasn't obsoleted by a later update, apply the changes, post the draft. There was one wording change about the ombudsman team that needed some wording to fit into that structure. Adrian Farrell helped write it. We could look at the whatever draft number it is and see the change I made. It is called out explicitly in the Git history about this is a wording change, thanks to Adrian. Similar kind of thing, review the errata. If it was a still relevant editorial change, made them. I think I did all the errata in one draft, published it. This was the one that was not a consensus document. 87, whatever that number is, I can't speak. It says Managing Editor Secretariat, Managing Director Secretariat. And there's a draft that says, oh, it's really it's the IETF Executive Director. I wrote a draft 8717 bis that eventually this working group should adopt. It says it's just a terminology change throughout. Published it just before the deadline of the Irish meeting. So again, the same kind of thing. Are you still in the queue, John, or was that a mistake? Okay, known open issues. Here we have GitHub. Reference to a conflict of interest document is in the original document. No such conflict of interest document exists that we could find. That includes Scott racking through his memory and so on. The stuff about, so that should probably just go, well, unclear which category these things fall into. People can, working group can decide. There's internet draft content formatting, submission, working group charters, stuff like that, seriously outdated. The meetings, information about the meetings include things like mail your agenda to agenda@ietf.org. The working group roles are outdated, probably Mod Pod will have some impact on that. Charters don't mention privacy or security considerations. IANABIS has things to say about that. Mike Richardson had a whole bunch of feedback. I just put a link to his email rather than breaking them out into separate issues. This one, 8093, executive director versus manager of the secretariat, I incorporated that. So overtaken by events. Most of it, as I said, most of these open issues are not editorial changes. They are things that are still factually wrong, are now factually wrong. Unknown open items. So you can tell I just dragged the slide over from one to another. Same kind of thing here. I think the policy discussion, and this may be more relevant to 2418 Trey, is that what it is? Or BIS? I don't know. Okay. The next version of 2418 BIS. Same kind of thing. We need an overall read to mark things that are wrong. That will be easier. There's a lot more stuff there. Fine tooth comb. And I think, yeah, okay. Oh, comments from the floor. At 121, I said, oh, we can't give it to Mod Pod. It's going to be a black hole. And I was completely wrong on that. They're moving very quickly, sending off the final rough edges. So apologies. I already apologized to Jonathan about it. So here you go. Comments? I think a lot of what was said in the previous document also applies here. So people are not necessarily coming up to repeat.
Yeah, import that reference rather than repeating, please.
Might get in the queue eventually. On the previous slide, I think a lot of these things are just things to take out, which makes me confident that we can actually easily resolve them. So it's good to see.
Okay. Yeah, and most of these were, almost all of them were reported by other people. So not just me.
Suresh Krishnan. So there's some stuff like text-wise, there were some changes for the IESG membership. It says it changed the IAB liaison to a second IAB member. Like, where did that come from?
Came from the fact that the IAB, how to say, one of the documents said the IAB chair is an ex officio member, and another document said that there's another member of the IAB on the IESG. I don't remember which one it is. I can look through the Git history to see.
Okay. Okay, because the 2418, I think, specifically said it's a liaison appointed from the IAB. And I think it's like a regression, like because that thing still stands, the IAB appoints a liaison into this. And
Okay.
I think,
Great. Mail it to the list. We'll capture it as a thing
good.
that has to fix.
And the second thing is, what? Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Media is saying the liaison is not a member. And
Okay.
I think that's captured in the original 2418. And I actually really like, so the PR action stuff is captured here, even though it's not an updating RFC. So I like the fact, but it's not consistent with the thing that we are just consolidating. So, but I do like that stuff is included in this. Thank you.
Thanks. So I ask for a call for adoption.
So thoughts on that? How ready are we here? One thumbs up from the room.
Same thing that I said on the previous one.
Any concerns or opposition, or nobody's walking to the microphone line? Queue is empty. Yeah, I would say that there's some support for taking this also as a starting point. Again, we'll discuss this formally on the mailing list, but looks good, and I thought it looked good. So work remains, but it's a good starting point.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. And David.
You're welcome, Pete. All right. Good morning, everyone. For those of you that were in Gen Dispatch about exactly a year ago, I presented a version of this, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. But conceptually, my name is David Skenazy, and I'm here to talk about milestones. For those of you who've been working on the 2418 BIS effort, you've seen that that's where our milestones come from. Conceptually, they're part of the charter or right next to the charter, depending on which piece of text you read. And the idea is you have a list of deliverables of what the working group is supposed to do, including some specific timeline for the 3 to 6 month range. So what's the point of these? We had a long discussion initially on the working group chairs list about this, and eventually on the Gen Dispatch list. And the 2 points that I've heard from people of what they were useful was, one, for ADs to know what the working group was doing and to be able to say, you haven't done anything in the last year. Is everything okay? And another view I've heard from folks is that there are people outside the IETF that look at these milestones to see if they should care about what IETF is doing. So to focus on that second one, are they useful to know what's going on? No, they're not. So I didn't update the data that's been collected over the last few years, so it hasn't been updated, but I don't think the situation has gone better. A bunch of working groups have milestones that are 10 years in the past, and that's okay. But that means that if you're relying on them to know what IETF is doing, you're getting wrong information. So you really shouldn't be doing that anyway. And so in 2020, the IGE started an experiment to say, you know what, it's helpful to know what people are working on, but if we put a date, we keep bumping it by a quarter every quarter, and that's also not particularly helpful. So they did an experiment to say, what about if we have milestones without dates? And one of the nice backdoors into our process is that if you call it an experiment, you can do pretty much what you want. And this experiment has been running since then, is never closed, which is fine. But it saves some time for some chairs, and it's been kind of on a per working group by working group basis. The responsible AD decides to enable this feature or not. So this was the proposal that I had a while back before we even started in earnest the conversations to start the PROCON working group was, all right, we should make these milestones optional because in some cases they aren't useful anymore. We should make the dates officially optional. So take the ISG experiment and make that an official part of our process and add more flexibility in this granularity. Particular, like the 3 to 6 month part in 2418 was a little bit too tight. And at the end of the day, we leave kind of a lot of this to the tools team and the data tracker in terms of what the mechanics of it look like, but it comes down to on a per working group basis, and the responsible area director decides. So the important distinction that I've heard is for brand new working groups, it's super helpful to have milestones of like, okay, this is the first thing you're going to work on. And once that's done, you can open that second thing, but we want to do them in that order so you don't get distracted. But for long running working groups where it's kind of maintenance items that come and go, they've kind of lost their use because people take a look, are like, oh yeah, that one's this tight in the process. The milestones don't help. So key being is keeping the property of having it on a per working group basis as an agreement between the chairs and the responsible area director. So this is the slide that wasn't there last year. What do we want to do with this? We explicitly chartered PROCON with a mention of milestones, so this would be in charter. And our kind of three options are, we don't do this at all because it's a terrible idea, but that wasn't the sense I got from the room a year ago. One option, we put this into 2418 BIS so that it really we'll have a new version of 2418 that has milestones the way we want them to be. And the third option is to leave it as a separate draft that updates depending on when it's published, 2418 or 2418 BIS. What do y'all think? That's all my slides. Very ominous, Roman.
Hi, David. Roman Dinello, I just wanted to come to this mic to make it very explicit. I'm speaking as an individual. It is going to commingle with my experiences being on the ISG. I like the idea that we're rethinking kind of this. I also like the idea that we're exploring it for the different dimensions of, is it an in-flight working group? Is it a new working group? And at the granularity of milestones, milestones without dates, and milestones without kind of sequencing. I think we need to talk about it a little more. I think it shouldn't surprise you today that I am less excited about pulling milestones kind of out. Mostly it just kind of strikes me, milestones seem like a proven approach to any amount of project management. I would just have us reflect on our day jobs. How often do you talk about things with your boss or your stakeholders and you tell them, well, I'm not going to tell you when I'm going to be done. So I'm just a little bit concerned that we don't have, what this will do is ultimately remove any transparency, not only from outsiders, which is, thanks for acknowledging, outsiders watching the IETF process, but also folks that perhaps are not spending 100% of their time only in one working group where they're keeping their state in their head. And this idea of, I'm floating between working groups. It's just what I think we as the community would benefit from is a consistent mechanism to communicate this information across working groups. And it's not bespoke for, I need to understand how a particular working group operates to signal. So personally, I think we should open up this topic, and I think we should calibrate across all those different dimensions I mentioned: in-flight working group, new working group, with dates, with not. Can we signal sequence? One of the concerns I would drop on the community is from the perspective of balloting on charters in the past. I would wonder how ADs would start balloting on charters if they felt like they did not have a sense of what the deliverables would be. And would we see a different phenomenology in the way charters are minted, especially for new starts, that instead of describing what would be done, that would now start appearing in the inline text of the charter, which would actually remove even more flexibility, which is something I would not be a fan of, because it would be this idea of, how do I know what you're delivering, which is some of the review criteria. So I think we need to explore the dimensionality there.
Absolutely. So try to make sure I
there
respond to all three of your
I
points.
should have paused.
No, it's all right. So on one of them, so first off, absolutely, I apologize if it wasn't clear. I'm not presenting this as a, let's absorb it, move it with our ideas. It's a, are we going to do this? And then let's have a discussion on all those details. This is just a straw man. Then
I took it that way.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then I totally agree with you. My boss generally doesn't bug me too much about what I'm doing, but yeah, it's a good way to think about this, because we have, for some of it, I have deliverables that are like, my team is going to ship this HTTP gateway in November. And some of it is, my team's keeping the lights on that project we shipped 2 years ago. And that one just doesn't have a date on it. Just costs us, 2 team members every days of a week anyway. And on the point of the chartering process, so I've been involved in a couple charters over the last few months, and especially a new charter. I'm not talking about a recharter. We have a deliverables section specifically to further, the scope section is clear about the topic, but then to kind of push the solution in a given direction without constraining the working group too much. And so in both of those cases, we had a list of deliverables in the charter text. And then when it came to, milestones, copy, paste, which wasn't particularly useful. I still think we should keep those in that case, in the early cases. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting we remove deliverables from a charter, because the ISG shouldn't approve a charter where we don't even know what you're going to work on. So totally agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll get off but to comment on the idea of cutting pasting from deliverables and milestones, I concur. We see that phenomenology too, and it points of why have you done both? But I would assert we also see charters where, I have a scope, and the deliverables are a little more in the prose, and so it's a lot more art.
Yeah. Thanks. No, and it's important to, I like the way you think about it. I'm not suggesting we stop doing process management. I'm suggesting that a part of our process management, like that, exactly the same thing at Google. I literally, while I was here, had a project manager bug me to update the bug to copy and paste what I put 6 months ago, and that wasn't a good use of anyone's time. So it's just about the process of how we do project management, because we're definitely not throwing out that out the window. Russ.
Hi. So I think that having gone through a recharter of lamps recently, which was interesting, but the result is the milestones reflect the deliverables, even though at a different granularity. And that was an interesting outcome. I don't believe any of the dates. You know, some will come sooner, some will take longer. It's the nature of consensus. But I do think it's helpful to capture at a document level the deliverables.
Yep. And actually, well, for everyone in the queue, including you, Russ, if we were to make some changes like this, do you have an opinion on whether it should live inside 2418 BIS or separately, or if we shouldn't change milestones at all? Kind of, because I think from my perspective, I've gotten some good feedback on this document. I'm kind of waiting to know if it's going to be a separate draft or if it's going to be in 2418 before I start writing PRs, because that'll look very different.
I think 2418, since it's open, is a good place. But again, same comment on the last one. Let's not make this last forever.
Absolutely.
Excuse me, Russ, what did you mean by granularity?
Document granularity is what I said.
Leslie.
Yeah, Leslie Daigle. First and foremost, I want to say thank you for the updates since first presented a year ago. I think it's pretty clear that it's evolved based on listening and hearing different viewpoints. That's super helpful. The thing that I stood up to say is that, I mean, I remember when I first started participating in the IETF, which was now measured in decades, which terrifies me. Milestones and charters, et cetera, were, very serious business, negotiated one-on-one with your area director and then discussed within the ISG, et cetera. There were not the tools like the data tracker that allowed individual working group chairs to change state on things, even documents. So it was really a very different world. And milestones meant something different. They really were a commitment. And I mean, time passes, things change, that's cool. But I think what it really winds up meaning is there's a discussion to be had here about how does the IETF want to manage and express commitments of work plans within working groups, between working groups in the ISG and the rest of the world. And so maybe it's not milestones, maybe it's something entirely different. And I think that level of discussion would be really useful, but I sort of feel that winds up being maybe well out of scope for this particular working group. But I don't know, collected thoughts.
Yeah. That's really interesting, and I think that's an option, but I totally agree with you that might blow up the scope of 2418 BIS a bit too much. So we could maybe have the conversation on the side as well, and see where it leads us.
Hey, David. Thanks. Thanks, Yari. First of all, I think it's actually good that you brought this up again. And what I really love is when we look at the data tracker these days, you can actually see activities against documents really well. I mean, the visibility there is excellent. And perhaps what is missing here is the tie-in between that activity and milestones inside our tooling, which might be useful to have. But I'm with you. I think that the dates aren't really meaningful that much in terms of visibility externally. I think you're right. Your example was right on. And I think it's worth mentioning, right, that program management, that the analogy is used all the time, and it was used all the time way back when, and it wasn't a good analogy even then. And the reason it wasn't a good analogy is because none of us work for each other except for a small handful of exceptions. Nobody's paying our bills to make sure we hit a particular deadline, and consensus takes what it takes in terms of timing. So I like the idea of getting rid of the timelines, but I'd like us to also look, and maybe this is more a tooling thing than anything that has to be in 2418 BIS. It's just linking milestones to documents, and I think that would be an interesting exercise. Thank you.
Thanks. Just to, milestones are currently, you have a way in the data tracker tooling to tie them to documents. It's kind of how my view of the UX, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can see on the milestone, like there's a link to the draft, but if you go to the draft, there's not really the other direction. You could imagine, like, I like your point that it's true, the tooling has gotten really good. I really like the timeline view of a draft and like the replaces and all that. That would be great. We could imagine putting the milestone date as a star on there. The problem is that it would generally be in the past. But yeah, no, that integration. And part of what I'm thinking about this effort is to put more of that, the nitty-gritty details of this into the hands of the tools team with, ISG approval, than into a document that we're probably not going to reopen for many years.
Jari, I could just two comments. First, with the chair hat on, I closed the queue. Let's be fairly brief on these comments, so we have one more topic on the agenda. And then as an individual comment, and this is more, it's not so much about the if or the what, but it's more about how. And I think it would be reasonable to have a very brief statement in the 2418 BIS that says, there are milestones and the management of this is up to the ISG policies or some such. And then, the details of, how this is tooled and exactly what the current IETF feels like we have to have, particular kind of approvals for changes or, how they're managed, that would be a more dynamic thing. I think that would make practical sense. Thank you.
I personally like that a lot. Suresh.
Thank you, Suresh Krishnan. So I'm really like Roman. I think this is kind of needed for the ADs to kind of keep the chairs like honest and keep the working group honest. And I think it's part of the job of the AD to kind of make sure this is done. And I know like Eric kind of deleted the milestones that you pointed out in there. So you have like don't have truth in advertising since it's gone, but
bet you I could find some new ones right now.
but I think I'm personally open to this being optional. So I think one of the recommendations is optional, and then the AD can decide. I'm personally open to that, right? But I really think the AD should not take it up. But I don't have a strong opposition to like doing it on a case-by-case basis. And I do know that there's people in this room who actually look at milestones from the outside, and I do believe like what Leslie was saying, right? Like it is some serious stuff for some people on the outside because it kind of signals like where we intend things to happen. And it also gives you the size of the effort, like when the chartering stuff happens. So I think it's valuable, but I'm open to that being optional.
Thanks. And I really do think it's valuable. And I think making them optional will increase the value because the ones that have them are the ones that are using them and keeping them up to date. And the working groups that don't look at them at all, assuming AD approval, will remove them or have them without dates. And that I think would be the best of both worlds because then it becomes a useful signal.
Right. And I think like to Yari's point about the tooling, right? Like the tooling can actually ping the AD and the chairs. Like when things go wrong, if there's nothing to ping, then it doesn't work.
Yeah, great. And speaking of tooling,
Robert Sparks is an individual. This is, the queue has been very long, so I've got a deep stack. I'm going to try to be very, very brief. I completely disagree with Roman that milestones, I think your quote, were a tried and true tool for project management. Yeah, sure, but not for the kind of project management that we do here. We have ground truth that they are not, and it's just wishful thinking to think that they could be. I don't think that we should continue with anything that the shape that we've got. I like the shape that you're proposing. The comment that you made last about the places where somebody does bother to use them and keeping them accurate is good. I would seriously propose, I'm not joking, replace the word milestone with aspirational goal. Literally those words.
No, I won't disagree that that's what they are. I miss a milestone at work, I get in trouble. My authors in my working group miss, they're a year behind. Yeah, I'm not going to pay them for writing the draft.
And the final thing I wanted to bring to the line was, I think, attempting to normalize the use or even appearance of these things across all of the groups in the IETF should be an anti-goal. The ability for our different areas and our different working groups to behave differently and present differently is a feature, not a bug.
Thanks.
Yeah, then Eric, and please be brief.
I have only three things for Eric. So on this slide, I think it's way better if you do it directly in the 2418 bis. It's simpler. Like Roman, I like to get the list of deliverables in the charter, which is different than the milestone as so-and-so. Whether the name of the milestone, the one that are dynamic, it would be nice if for the AD or the group chair or the authors, we can see the date this milestone was updated. If it was updated 1 month ago, it's probably good. If it was updated 3 years ago, I was short.
Thank you.
Harald Alstrand, riding hobby horses. We have two kinds of groups in the IETF. We have development teams and we have maintenance teams. We just happen to call them both working groups. For maintenance teams, milestones are useless. What they need to have is a list of the documents they're working on. For development teams, milestones can be good if they're kept up to date. If I were Marshall Rose, I would say that, and if the working group is shut down if they miss their milestones. But we need to separate those things. And I would like to have them separated formally, but at least we should have the flexibility to say, no, this is a maintenance team. Don't bother with milestones. Or this is a development team. We expect things to come out of it by a date.
Thank you.
Mike Bishop, I'm going to echo a couple other comments that yes, do it directly in the BIS. Yes, I think having milestones is useful in a lot of cases, maybe not for every working group, but for working groups where the charter says you will deliver this, this, and this, I'd like this, this, and this to be in a milestone. Currently, the only information you have about a milestone is the date that somebody used to think they would be able to finish it by, which is not terribly useful, and the document that it might be attached to. I would love to maybe get rid of that date and replace it with fields pulled from that document that says, hey, they promised to do this, and and the associated document is in last call. Like, that's useful progress tracking as you see how the milestones associated document moves through the process. Or a milestone that doesn't have a document, maybe we should be concerned.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Jonathan, for the last word.
Yeah, as a chair of a very long-lived maintenance group, I can't remember the last time I touched my milestones, and previously I felt guilty about that, but maybe I shouldn't, so thank you. So I like this work. In terms of where it goes, kind of both options make me sad, which is unfortunate, which is I like the idea of having the updates be only purely the editorial changes, but I also don't want to start, after we've consolidated this ridiculous updates tree, I don't want to start making a new one. So I don't know, maybe this should be for tear. But then again, that'll also take forever. So I don't know. All options are terrible.
Yeah. All right. Well, then we can pick the least terrible. So what I'm hearing from this room is that I'm not completely insane, that there's interest in maybe tweaking what's in 2418. I think I'm hearing that putting the changes in 2418 bis is the right place. I'm happy to wait until that's adopted and then take the action item to look at it with kind of fresh eyes about how, like, replace the draft with what a PR to 2418 would look like, and then kind of bring that back to the either the list or the next meeting, whatever happens first. How, does that sound good for next steps?
I think that sounds good. I think the mechanics of, like what's folded where is maybe maybe like not as interesting as the actual substance. I think there is interest on this topic. We will do something, but I also detect more diversity of opinion than on the other topics. So we'll have to continue discussion, and yeah, but it's a good topic.
I'm happy to keep helping with this.
Thank you. And we're just gonna jump very briefly to our final topic. Just a sec. Yeah, so this IETF chair delegation. So Lars Eggert is not here today. He's flying currently. But we have a few minutes to sort of at least flag this topic. So one of the items on the charter is ability for the IETF chair to delegate things. Lars has a draft that is in pretty reasonable state. So it does specify this emergency stand-in situation, and it specifies the delegation of specific roles with regards to IST chair, Gen AD, IAB member, and so on, for kind of like workload management and other similar things. We have a decent chunk of current issues discussed on the list. Yeah, what should I'm not going to go through all of this, but yeah. As one example, so if you have an emergency stand-in situation, which is currently specified to be either the IAB chair or the LLC executive director, then should that emergency stand-in also be the one handling the IST chair duties? That would seem perhaps more reasonable that one of the ADs could do that, or at least that should be an option. Another thing that we've discussed on the list is the charter scope with regards to delegation, and does it limit itself to ADs? I've had some offline discussions with a bunch of people on this, actually, and sort of one practical example that came out of those discussions was, could you also delegate in some cases to IAB members, which I think is decently reasonable thing to do. Yeah, we could discuss the details, but yeah, certainly not, or at least from my personal perspective, it should not be open season for like delegation sort of completely freely to anybody. I think that might have some harmful effects. But so that's where we are with this draft. Any particular feedback in the last 3 minutes on that? We could take it, or.
No, that's old. I think especially the IAB chair should be included, who is also a member of the IHG, so that person that has a good view on things, right? So because ADs is really not including all the IHG members, so that's really too limiting.
So Rishkrishnan, I'm totally supportive of this kind of thing where the IETF chair can delegate. I think we probably need to redline what are the things they cannot delegate. I think one of them is probably the membership of the IAB. I'm most uncomfortable with that the IETF chair delegates, but I think this is generally a step in the good direction, and I'm very supportive of this.
David Skenazy, I think, yes, this is a good starting point to adopt. We'll have a lot of details that we can discuss as a working group once we get there. Do you want to talk about the charter issue as part of this discussion, or want to do it after?
Yeah, I think that's part of this discussion, yes.
Okay. So since I caused the message on the list, one of the things that was proposed in the charter for PROCON was that the IETF chair could only delegate to ADs. And I suggested that we shouldn't have the charter have that limitation, and instead leave it to the working group to decide what the limitation of delegation should be. There was multiple people, I remember Mirya and others on the list, who agreed, and I think like it got missed in the flow of email because this was during the ISG review and the charter got approved without those comments being addressed. How do you want to handle that, Roman?
So to jump in as the responsibility, the exact finesses, it was actually, the comment came after the approval of the charter. As I explained kind of with the timeline, what got missed is there was the latency before, there was the public announcement of it when I was not watching the mail list for more things, but the charter was approved. And even if I had seen it, we would have had to rerun the whole process. So if there is, I am loath to recharter the new working group several weeks after it, but I think the general rules apply here. I mean, I look to Yari as the working group chair. As with any working group, even though we just chartered, if there is a desire to reopen the box, we should have we should have a conversation with the working group and we handle it in all the usual ways. My constraints on the charter that you heard me talk about in the beginning, like let's finish certain things before other things, were largely focused on the 2026 box, trying to bound the standards process 2026 and 2418. So I think we should take this to the list and kind of talk about where we are with that.
Sounds good. Yeah. Miria's suggesting do a call on the list. I would personally be in favor of a very tight scoped recharter that could go really quickly. But yeah, we can discuss it on the list. Oh, Miria's asking if you want to do a show of hands of the room.
We're over. We gotta.
Yeah, we're over time, and also I think this is a little bit more complicated thing than where we can sort of immediately have an opinion. So let's do this on list instead. And Jonathan, last word again.
Last word again, exciting. Yeah, so I'm not to speak to the charter issue, but I think in the general topic of how restrictive do we need to be about what decisions the chair can make. I mean, presumably the NomCom chose the chair because they thought they would make good decisions. So I would say let the chair make what decisions they think is appropriate. And if they're completely off the rails and delegating everything, that's why we have recalls. So I'd say leave the constraints as loose as possible and let the chair make good decisions.
That is also reasonable. Thank you. So we've completed our time, we completed our agenda, and we're going ahead with some calls on the list for document adoption and moving forward with that. Work remains on the other topics and also on those two main updates for the next phases. So stay tuned. Thank you all.
And I just want to say again, thank you for everyone's kind of support and input to get us chartered and get us started at this point. I know this is a topic with lots of different kind of broad equities. Please bring your friends and colleagues to this working group so we have more energy and interest on process topics.